Триває міжнародний форум з питань довкілля United for Nature Agenda for Ukraine.
With our United for Nature Agenda for Ukraine forum, please meet the next panel on the reform of state environmental control. Please welcome Lina Kramarenko, Igor Zubkovich, acting head of the state environmental inspection, and Helena Kravchenko from Ekologia Prava Людина NGO. You have 15 minutes for you. Good afternoon, dear forum participants. Today, my colleagues and I are going to present to you our vision of re-establishing a transparent and understandable, clear-cut state environmental control system in Ukraine, which would enjoy trust from all the stakeholders, from businesses, from the public, from the government. As previous speakers have already mentioned it several times, the environmental control is a cross-cutting topic in all aspects of nature preservation. Because of that, the Institute of State Environmental Control in a European format, created at the time when Ukraine is fending off the Russian invasion. Well, I think this is a time when this idea undergoes a stress test of survival, and there's no more time to wait. We need to actively design the environmental control system in line with current environmental standards. Quality, taking stock of environmental damage, is one of the important components of the exercise. Ukraine is among the biggest EU countries in terms of its territory, with sizable forest, more than 3,000 rivers, very rich bioresource, more than 72,000 of species. Meanwhile, the inspectors of the State Inspectorate of Environmental Control are heavily overstretched. Imagine an inspector having to oversee 1,000 enterprises, hundreds of square kilometers of territory. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, we were able to optimize the State Environmental Inspectorate to improve their efficiency in cooperation with the Ministry for Interior, State Service for Emergencies, Ministry of Defense. They've been busily taking stock of the damage inflicted, losses, and compensation estimates. 7 new techniques have been implemented for that, and in the scope of MOUs with PwC, we have an analysis exercise carried out by PricewaterhouseCoopers. The data are accessible for the public. They're in open format, and this is a part of the overall system for threat monitoring. Exactly at the time of the tragedy at Kakhovska hydropower plant, some of the inspectors were able to put their accumulated ideas and experience to good practice. The war has already inflicted more than 4 billion hryvnias worth of damage. Meanwhile, we see that the system of environmental control is in bad need of changes and improvements. not just to streamline the red tape, but also it requires some systemic in-depth changes, also in the positions and views of the officials. The old-time environmental control system that was heavily based on punishment is really more outdated and has to be mothballed in favor of a more modern system. There are huge legislative gaps, there are corruption risk involved, the equipment and lab equipment available to the service is subpar, and professional level of its inspectors is not to the desired extent. And because of these challenges, some specific steps to reform the state environmental control system have been designed with an intention of leaving the punishment-based system back in history, with the clear understanding of the need to reshape its human resource policy. And I'd like to pass the floor over to Igor Zubovich, who is the chair of one of inspectors, to tell more about expected changes. Good afternoon, dear forum participants, dear guests. It's really an important event. I'm starting by saying that the reform of the state environmental control has long been overdue. The state environmental inspectorate is unfortunately burdened with a function not proper for its mandate. Our staff are really willing to come back to the peaceful life, to properly do the job as they used to, but as we are in a protracted war with continued aggression, it is not yet possible. Now, coming back to the idea of reform, there is a range of challenges, and Irina correctly mentioned the many problems that the inspectorate has. First of all, it is necessary to adopt a national law on state environmental control. Next, we need to digitize the process. We've started using the threat assessment e-system designed by the Ministry for Environment Protection. We do everything possible to digitize our experience so that everyone, and not just in Ukraine, is able to see the results. We see our next step as the one of improving the professional level of our staff. We will use the support of our international partners to improve the technical provision of our labs and chapters across the country. Last but not least, we intend to offer more job opportunities for those who fought in the army, to give them a new lease of life, peaceful life, in our inspectorate. Our vision of the State Environmental Inspectorate is the one of a single oversight institution with some 8,000 staff. They will be distributed per territory. Each of them will be tasked with overseeing about 182 economic agents and some 75.5 square kilometers of territory. The approaches to be professed include technology, prevention, transparency, result-orientedness, HR policy. As regards the new system of state control that we suggest, in our view, it should comprise two levels. The first one, Ukraine will be mapped. We will have a map with bits of territory distributed, and there will be inspectors, probably locals, assigned to roam their assigned plots every day to see what is happening. It will be his or her responsibility. He or she will have to properly register all types of offense or incidents, and the person will be in charge of all types of resources on the plot. Secondly, there will be a function of decisions to be made at the level of the Central Inspectorate, also in terms of regular and inspections and down raids. There will be a change in the overall approach towards the controlling office operation. We are going to switch from just looking after delinquents and bringing them to responsibility towards more preventative measures. The current system has 18 territorial and interterritorial chapters. From the practice, from our research, we see that it would be advisable to reduce their number to have 12, I would say, counties. After the deoccupation of the Donetsk, Luhansk Oblast and the Crimea, there will be 12 of them. We've started working on registering environmental crimes on the territory of the Crimea, even now, and we also presented the public with a dashboard containing information about environmental crimes committed on the territory of the Crimea. No reform is possible without proper material support. With the view of it, we are going to use partners, their capacities to create 12 regional labs in line with all European standards to have correct and on-time measurements. We are the only authority today to calculate estimates of damage committed by Russian Federation's aggressors. And to properly calculate the damage, we will need modern technologies, nicely equipped labs, and trained professionals to handle the function. A cost estimate for a lab like this is in the range of 92 million hryvnias, and we really count on international partners and donors to help us with buying them. Thank you for your attention. Dear Olena, you can add with your vision of how the public, the civic society sees the reform. Well, I am not representing not just the public, but even the whole of the environmental movement, just a part of it. And with your permission, I'd like to give you a glimpse of our idea of such control, and definitely 15 minutes won't be enough to cover all of the topic, and because there are many minute things to look into, and you know that the devil hides in the detail. We've spoke to the chair of the Environmental Committee in the Parliament, committee members. We will expect that the Ministry will be able to present the algorithm behind this new updated law in much detail, because the whole reform will ultimately depend on the mechanism inside. I would like rather to comment of how overdue the reform has been. Actually, it should have started at the time of our gaining our independence in 1991. We did inherit a faulty Soviet system with non-performing controls and oversight. Some of the recent criminal cases opened because of crimes in the forestry sector are confirmation of that. We had quite a positive presentation today of the forestry representative, but for some reason he omitted the gray zone with illegal logging. We heard nearly nothing about how water bodies are being affected by the illegal logging, other such problems. These are all due to poor efficiency of this control authority. The new approach and new piece of legislation that we've just heard about is based on recommendations, analysis, also from the European Parliament and the European Council from 2001. It does comply with some recommendations from the OECD. They published them in 2023, and it specifically concerns recommendations on environmental control. And still, the reform is really a very topical matter for us from the point of view of the public. Surely the paradigm has to change. This body should become a preventative one with the key function of preventing any further deterioration of the condition of environment, of habitats, as much as possible. The body will have to oversee the observance of environmental legislation, but for the body to be efficient, to perform as intended, it will have to have a range of measures and tools available to it to prevent corruption risks, particularly through clear-cut procedures and processes, should include regular inspections, down raids, timely response to applications, and the procedures to be instituted in a new body will have to be really cross-linked and transparent. The territorial units will have to have more responsibility, also in terms of their responsibility for the decisions they make. And the central office of this inspectorate will be rather in charge of analysis, dialogue with businesses, particularly compliant businesses. It will have to explain the rules, and it will have to institute a good dialogue with the public, not like greenwashing, but some real dialogue, explaining the need for a balance between economic development and nature preservation, social interests. I think this trialogue will ultimately result in success of the reform. And a couple of more ideas. The relevance of the reform is furthermore increased by this full-scale war. As a public representative, I cannot completely trust the facts collected so far and how verified they are. I mean, particularly data about deoccupied territories, and this is also about facts of the effect of military action on environment. Because effectively, there hasn't been any real criminal case opened in respect of the hostilities' impact on the environment. The importance of the reform is also in the fact that it will provide correct, verified results, ensuring proper professional cooperation between the General Prosecutor's Office, Ministry for Environment Protection, and the reformed or newly established Environmental Control Authority. All these components working together will enable us to gather all the inspection functions with one authority. And if we are successful with the reform, we will be able to successfully comply with Clause 8 of Presidential Peace Formula, without which it will remain just a declaration. Without that, it won't be just about this Clause 8 being inoperational. It will mean that our environmental reform is endangered. So I think we are exactly at the turning point, and hopefully it will be a turn in the right direction. Thank you. Well, actually, everything Elena has mentioned is reflected in our strategic vision and the bill that we are working on together now. And really, today we can say that we are turning back to the nature rather than limiting ourselves to just business inspections. Our inspection officers are going to work with a wider range of function, rather checking for the observance of environmental law requirements. So this is the key target of this new piece of legislation that we surely need. So we strongly focus on that. We strongly focus on challenges described by businesses, by civic society activists, and we want to transit all the way from a punishing body to the one that can do something positive in a preventing mode. We need to make sure that environmental inspectors are really helpers of businesses, sincerely willing to become environmentally responsible ones. With your permission, just one more thought. The reform will have to stop the standoff between the state environmental control inspectorate and the state regulatory service. The reform will need to find a balance with which the government will be able to exercise control of the condition of the environment and observance of the legislation. And I think the state regulatory service will be the inspection authority itself, like helping this newly established body to better perform. Yes, the environment is suffering immensely, and it will take much more funds to at least restore the nature to its previous condition. Another big responsibility this new body will face is about making everything possible to get reparations, to make good for the damage inflicted on the nature of the. I think it will be a test of statehood among ministerial employees, government officials, showing everyone if we really are to become a democratic country with clean environment.
Okay, so thank you. We come up with a discussion and a small conversation plus a presentation. It's good when different state agencies are finding common language and engaging others. So as we prepare ourselves for the next panel, we have two more panels for today, and they will cover a lot. So we keep up the pace, good time, so we'll have reform of the management as these waste as part of the circular economy. And one more thing, someone lost their AirPods during the break, so if this is the case, if you identify that you have lost your device, so here I have it. and we were originally planning to work until 18:10. We might have a small delay, but still we're calling upon our panelists to make sure we keep the timelines as planned. And I'll inform that this session will be moderated by Svetlana Berzina, the head of the Civil Council of the Ministry of Environment. So she will introduce the panelists to you right now. Svetlana, are you ready? Yes, just a second. We are gathering everyone. Okay, I believe almost everyone have joined us. Once again, I already have my own AirPods, so please take yours. So, Svetlana, you have the floor. One more thing, as the moderator, as the timekeeper, I would like to remind you about the time limitations. You have 55 minutes and not a minute more. Thank you for your instructions. Dear friends, greetings on this panel of the sustainable waste management as the prerequisite for the circular economy. Let me remind you that we'll be talking about the hierarchy of waste management, which is considered as the basis for the EU acquis. It prevents the wasted preparation for the further use, recycling, disposal, generation of energy resources, transportation to landfills and burials. Now, that structure has to work at the national level as well as at the regional and local community level, also at certain enterprises and households. The circular economy model is considered as a tool to implement the European Green Deal, and this model is designed to support the business model that are focusing on the second use of the material, like use of recycled materials and recycling. And surely these components that we'll be covering today, they are interrelated, and they support the implementation of the Green Deal. So today we'll be talking about this together with Evgenia Popovich, the Director for the Department of Digital Transformation of Electronic Public Procurements, and the waste management of the Ministry of Environment. We'll have Oleg Bondarenko, head of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Environmental Policy, Volodymyr Buzhan, expert from the Center of the Economic Recovery. He's the expert of many projects of international technical support. We have Natalia Kozlovska, Deputy Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine, and she's coordinating the activity on implementation, the tasks and functions of the ministry in terms of implementation of state policy in areas of construction, urban development, technical regulations, architectural control, etc. Lesya Karnau, Deputy Head of the Kyiv City State Administration. We have Taras Galushny. He'll be joining us online, the State of the Public Enterprise Green City. Unfortunately, Taras couldn't join us, so he'll be working with us online. So, dear participants, we have some time for the discussion, so as a moderator, I will have a chance to ask some additional questions to you. So please make sure you will have time for that. So let's pass the floor to Evgenia Popovich, the head of department at the Ministry of Environment Protection. Please. Greetings. Let's watch a small video and then go straight to the main topic of our discussion. What's the change of the approach to waste management? Out of all the household waste, we sort only 5.6%, and 1.4% is incinerated. The rest goes to landfills. The illegal landfills is a big problem for our country. According to previous assessments, we have around 33,000 of them. The illegal landfills that do not up to the standards, they have an impact on the environment. It results in the wildfires and they might also impact the environment because the bio-waste, they generate methane that has a significant greenhouse effect. The waste they cause fires, they impact the health. The recultivation of the landfill in Lviv started after the fire, killing 4 people. But this is not a resolution of the problem. The main issue that the waste management industry was not working was the lack of the legislative basis with clear requirements to waste management and recycling. The reform is all about decentralization of functions, a new permit system, new operating rules for the landfills, development of the infrastructure for waste management. So, in developing the waste management industry, we take a look at the experience of our Western partners like Germany, UK, Switzerland, and currently the Ministry have signed 5 memorandums on the development of the waste management infrastructure. We're still preparing the package of documents for the potential investors. Thank you. So, starting on the 9th of July, we've the law on waste management entered into power, and we started the implementation of the reform. Now, it doesn't mean that we got up on the 9th of July and we already have all the infrastructure for waste management, or we have the landfills that comply with certain norms, at least with the environmental protection and environmental security norms. No. We kind of see, based on the EU experience, that some of the EU countries have achieved results, but they needed like 20 or 30 years to have them, and they continue changing the legislation in order to solve certain challenges that arise during the implementation of the EU norms and directives. Well, the framework law that entered into power on the 9th of July, it set up some main principles, which is the decentralization of waste management and the development of the infrastructure for waste management. So, currently, the Ministry has drafted a number of legislation on establishing certain rules and legislative norms in waste management, like national classifier and the wastes and other dangerous and other types of waste. I'm not going to be listing and mentioning all the legislation that were approved, but still, the law on waste management introduces wider responsibility for the producer. So the Ministry have elaborated this law, has developed this law, and supplied it for the Verkhovna Rada's approval. It's a law covering packaging and some other aspects. Our EU, the experience of EU countries says that all the countries who started this reform, they had a very difficult path. The path of changing the awareness of the population, as well as the changing of the understanding of the waste management system by the local and central executive authorities. So, the Ministry, in order to ensure a high-quality planning of the waste management, which is the have developed the National Waste Management Plan, which is currently under the environmental assessment process, and will be considered with the interested parties that are related to or to the generation of certain types of wastes. Surely there's a lot of challenges for local and central self-government authorities while talking about the creation of the infrastructure. Still, we're not saying that because of decentralization that's clearly your functions. No. Thanks to the memorandums signed by the ministry with certain regions, that's Ivano-Frankivska, Odessa, Poltavska, Kyivska, and Zakarpatska, total of 5 regions that are starting pilot projects on the development of infrastructure for waste management. They will have a waste management, waste recycling factory, and this model was elaborated by the ministry. It gave the roadmap to the others who signed memorandum with us, and currently we are searching for the investors who will be engaged in the direct construction of this infrastructure. It's important to mention that under a condition of the full-scale aggression, Ukraine, while implementing the reform of the waste management, is facing 3 challenges. First is the financial factor, because we understand that in order to terminate these illegal landfills and to do the recultivation of some of the landfills that are not up to the standards, we need funding. Second, that's a human resource. We understand that. The male population is currently engaged in combat operations. They're defending all of us as the result of this armed aggression. Now, the third component is this technical aspect. Now, these are the best practices that we can learn in the EU member countries. Now, this is how we've built our roadmap on the improvement of the waste management infrastructure on the territory of the regions that I've mentioned. Now, it's also critically important the recultivation of the waste recycling sites like landfills and others, because we saw that the fire broke out on the Lviv landfill, and it took 3 or 4 days to kind of extinguish that, and 4 people have been killed. And now we have the project that even during the military aggression, we can achieve certain results. We can ensure the recultivation of certain facilities. So thank you. Yes, thank you for such an important statement. Surely there will be questions to Evgenia, so please kind of wrote them down and be ready for the further discussion. Let me pass the floor to Lech Bondarenko, and I would like to ask him to focus on implementation of the reforms in the field of waste management as the main kind of locomotor for some of the changes, and the vision of this reform during the war, because the topic of waste would require a lot of funding, while we do have a lot of problems on our hands. So 4 years ago, when our young committee, so to say, on environmental policy and use of natural resources started its activity on the Verkhovna Rada of the 9th convocation. So we were asked, like, do everything but do not touch the waste management topic. So that is the kind of gray area. And only the great business is earning money on the waste. But on the other point, we heard that waste is like a gold, but you cannot intimidate the Verkhovna Rada committee, so we've combined our efforts together with the Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Environmental Protection, and we've made a very large step towards the implementation of reform. Back in 2022, during the full-scale aggression, we've completed the draft framework law on waste management and finally approved it. So we've also provided for 1 year on the implementation of subordinate legislation, and it launched into several directions. We changed the public opinion on whether there is a need for us to implement a waste management system or not. Surely we do need this. Everyone started talking, discussing, everyone started, saying that this was a very progressive step, and surely the adoption of this draft law as a law, despite the fact that it's a framework law, but still, it added up some additional marks for Ukraine in terms of our approximation to the European legislation. So we got some bonuses out of that. On the other hand, we allowed to draft the subordinate legislation, which is almost everything being elaborated and started implementation. And we also got a chance to develop new legislation, like legislation on the implementation of the widened responsibility of the manufacturer. There's several draft laws, primarily like what's already in the Verkhovna Rada, that's the draft law on the packaging of on waste packaging. So also there's the waste of the electronic equipment, batteries, then kind of old transport vehicles. So that's a separate areas, but they will be combined with overall principles. I mean, the structure of the waste management in Europe, they'll be combined by wider responsibility of the producer, meaning that the producer, he will have to be responsible for all the life cycle of the products that he produces, and he will also take responsibility for processing, for gathering and processing of such products. And all this would need to kind of result in a third component, and maybe this component is one of the most important for our country. That is the resolution of the problem around the accumulation of waste. And we're talking about solid household waste and the waste of electronic equipment, the dangerous waste, as well as the waste of the production industries. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we're talking about the new industry, which is highly resource requiring. It requires a lot of investments, but if we shall be implementing that in accordance to the European approaches, then those investments will surely be not only investments, but they would be turning into an income for those who will be exercising such activity in a quality manner, in accordance to legislation, and in accordance to clear and understandable economic principles. So our joining with the EU, it will only give further stimuli for this to be implemented and scaled up around the whole country. Surely, as Evgenia has already mentioned, the ministry has completed several steps that would facilitate the introduction of the system on the territory of the whole country. There's a number of memorandums to implement a new infrastructure on solid household waste processing, but that's only the beginning. Our purpose is to develop all the laws, to introduce all the laws on the waste processing and waste management, and to introduce this system further on, to scale it around the whole country. There couldn't be, without any kind of divisions, there couldn't be a territorial community or any small settlement without the system. Only in this case, we will truly fight, and we will be able to kind of overcome the inflow of waste that we have. And by combining the efforts of all the branches of power, the society and the business, which is one of the largest locomotives in this case, we will be able to achieve our goal. I thank you, and please join this group.
Thank you, Oleg. Our next speaker Please welcome Volodymyr Bizhan. He'll be speaking on the topic of waste, which is a multifaceted one. This is particularly the packaging waste, something we see as a sore in the eye of many. This type of waste is not seen by everyone as a priority, but still we think it is necessary to expand the scope of responsibility of producers as a basis for finding solution to the matter of such waste reduction. So please, Volodymyr. Thank you, Svetlana. I represent a project implemented with support of the European Commission, which is about circular economy, the strategy of circular economy. Yes, the situation as it stands today is as follows. Yes, we have this candidate status. We are preparing for the negotiations phase announced last December. There are specific preconditions for us involving certain indicators to be met. Add here the internal context we have in terms of documents already designed here. And the topic of the green transition. Ukraine has committed to joining the Green Deal in the EU. It had happened before the start of the war. We've committed also to become carbon neutral by 2060, which means we will have to look for appropriate mechanisms for that. And the circular economy can contribute indeed. What has changed since the beginning of the full-scale war? The sheer volume of waste has really increased. One of them being the rubble of destroyed infrastructure facilities. We had more than 30% reduction in our industrial output, which means that our capacity to implement such projects has furthermore been reduced. And we are in the process now of designing instruments to somehow move forward. If we look at applicable European experience to see what had preceded the reforms that we are talking about, a lot has been said publicly about, again, lengthy discussions and debates about kickstarting the process, about the directives related to waste management, them requiring quite a lot of time to start implementing them, 4 years to be exact in average. Many European countries setting deadline for meeting the requirements in 2025. So for us to have a circular economy as a complete cycle, we need the life cycle of the product and the waste management phase. So what are the expected outcomes of our measures to implement waste directives? If you look at directives, waste-related directives that we are going to implement in the short future, it's about electronic equipment, it's about packaging, and the economic effect of their implementation will depend on the processing market, its existence, and increased competitiveness of companies using processed raw materials. So this can become a tool for Ukraine to boost its economic growth. We are already working on the legislation to adapt it, yet still the market itself will kickstart at some point in the future, and some key results to be expected after 2025. Speaking of what I would finance, And to the question of why the circular economy hasn't been developed yet, multiple reasons were noted here. But again, it's a matter of better coordination with the government. It's about streamlining the activity lines in terms of country recovery. Finally, we need to ultimately design the strategy in the shortest possible term with the measures envisaged at the national and local level to stimulate circular economy development. There is a process of setting up work groups for that, and it is going to start soon. We will provide these working groups with the multifaceted feasibility studies for that. And we will also participate in the working group, joint one with the Ministry of Economy and Ministry for Environment Protection, which will focus on designing recommendations and submitting them to the cabinet. We do expect the work will be over by summertime, and then we will be able to switch on to design of indicators and related action plan. You can use this QR code on screen to join us, to leave your contacts, and you'll be able to participate in the work group by this summer. Okay. Thank you, Volodymyr. From what we understood, everything has just started now, and we can join. We can hop on the train with it to chart our further course towards making our economy more circular, achieving better results within the whole waste management hierarchy, whether it's about processing or reusing materials and so on, secondary use materials, everything that circular economy depends on. I'd like to give the floor now to Deputy Minister of Infrastructure, Natalia Kozlovska. I'd like her to give us more about the rubble, the war waste that has already accumulated, and there will be more of it, and how to deal with it. What are the legal tenets to regulate it? Thank you, Svetlana. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'd like to speak about these specific types of waste because of destruction. In peaceful life, it's a regulated process, a planned one, regulated by the government, whether it is about tearing down a building in a planned mode or rebuilding it, and so on. European countries have plans of that that first appeared somewhere in the middle of the past century. It specifically concerns planned management of solid, also construction waste. In our case, thanks to the law mentioned by Volodymyr on construction waste management, we don't understand that this is the path that we will have to go in a faster, probably more hectic way than the European countries had luck to. We will have to implement this law as soon as possible indeed, because of the military aggression of the Russian Federation. We have at least 100,000 facilities are deemed ruined, that is, affected beyond repair. I think no EU member state has ever faced something like that in its recent history. We do understand that the figure is a rough estimate, but the estimate stands at about 450,000 tons of construction rubble. This is the information collected from the territories under control of the Ukrainian government. That is, we have no clue as to the scope of damage and amount of waste on the occupied territory. Processing that great deal of waste will require lots of resources and technological processes. It is further complicated by the fact that we have never had any tradition of in-depth processing of such construction waste. For the most part, whatever we have is about 6% of the rubble that can be processed under current procedures. So probably it says that circular economy can be implemented quite quickly to battle it. Some steps have been already taken. In 2022, when the first understanding appeared after the occupation of some parts of the country in March, April 2022, we did understand that local self-governments will need some very specific tool to regulate the matter on site. We had a wider team of different government authorities, my institution, Ministry for Environment Protection, and others. We worked to have a cabinet resolution to streamline the procedure of managing this type of waste. The subject matter of regulation was based on our understanding that such waste, solid waste, is a mixed one in need of sorting in terms of different types of it, potentially hazardous objects and substances. We already then we understood that that was considered a resource that would require in-depth processing, rather than storing or piling them up. We had to look for places of temporary storage, we had to look for ways of sorting them and deeming them useful for specific uses. And this is quite a specific type of waste, because it's not just about, construction materials. It could be white appliances, it could be furniture pieces, even, sorry to say, but part of bodies of the pets may be found there sometime. And we do understand that this may well contain some hazardous items and substances. Today, with support from the government of Japan and the Japan International Development Agency, it has been decided to launch a pilot solid waste management and handling site that would also process this type of waste. Jointly with our partners, we are going to design a plan to deal with destruction waste, to cover all aspects of processing. Some key lines of operation will involve the following: setting up legal regulatory framework on technologies of sorting and processing such waste with proper institution of relevant technological processes. This is necessary because of the available, unfortunately, negative experience that was collected in Kyiv Oblast when they tried to just reduce the rubble into smaller pieces without sorting it. So now we see in the area a whole bunch of wild mix of materials comprising cement, bricks, wood, etc., which, if milled into finer particles, cannot be used. Meanwhile, we need to provide construction materials with proper technical characteristics, and without sorting construction waste, you can do nothing. This can be proven and confirmed by developers and construction specialists themselves, who tried it in due time, and they say now that without properly sorting, without ensuring all the strength parameters of the resulting material, you won't succeed. Next, we have to design would-be construction products that can be made out of that type of rubble. Even before the war, Ukraine had implemented the so-called Regulation 305 covering construction products. And the law on construction materials on the market was put in force last year. According to these updated requirements, we see some requirements to quality, safety, and so on of such products. Further processing of destruction waste will require funds. There should be some industrial process to produce materials out of it, with an understanding that the end cost of the materials will be higher than of the initial product. We also need to understand that the state has to establish and implement a realistically safe approach of treating such waste, with an understanding it may differ across regions because of the sheer scope and particularities. It will be also necessary to develop and implement target indicators for that. Some EU member states have it as a mandatory requirement to use processed construction materials in new development. We are very much convinced that similar language has to be included in regional and local development strategies. There should be a mechanism for mandatory use of secondary materials for construction purpose. In our view, it may become a viable stimulus for processing such waste. Yes, there should be an understanding that it will be a more expensive material, but still, this is how it should go. This should be done with proper understanding of best international experience, and we thank our international partners for that. We do hope that all of the partners helping us with the matter at the moment, the government of Japan, the UNDP, GIZ, USAID, the World Bank will continue their support to help us regulate the matter, also at the legislative level, which will allow us implementing a system of standards on such secondary construction materials in Ukraine, as well as certain mandatory requirements on the percentage of such materials to be used for construction. It will help us dealing with this huge amount of destruction rubble. It will reduce the number of sites used for storage of such materials. Thank you, Natalia. Very interesting. Some information is new for me, particularly on the catalog of construction materials. It's very important to promote such type of products for public procurement purposes, to avoid unverified data, greenwashing, and other such unwanted practices. And we go on with the circle economy and waste management at the regional level. Welcome Lesa Karnauk, Deputy Chair of the Kyiv Oblast State Administration, the oblast that has suffered greatly during the time of Russian occupation. This is a liberated territory now, the one that is badly in need of recovery, waste management included.
Well, thank you. Greetings, everyone, and big thanks to the team of the Ministry of Environment for the organization of this platform to have yet another discussion. It's been almost 12 years that I'm engaged in the environmental area. But for the first time, I feel myself, I feel the importance of the reform and how these reforms are being implemented at the regional level. And it's hard for me to compete with the other panelists because they're experts in this area. They know a lot of information. Well, I would like to add some more kind of regional challenges to that, because the challenges in terms of waste management, like preoccupation, has been kind of reinforced, has increased now due to more hostilities. So what we lack on the regional level? We lack the knowledge, like really the knowledge, what to do with different types, categories of waste. Earlier, we tried to regulate, this issue with the solid household waste. We thought that this is the easier thing after the dangerous waste. But when we've faced with large opposition by the business, by local authorities, so it was one trouble, then there was another trouble, the damage of destructions. So we've heard this figure by Natalia. On the territory of Kiev region, we have around 300,000 tons of damage as a result of ruination. Someone was burned to the ashes, someone was not. In certain places, there was an immediate response, like that was simply, gathered and removed. We've created something like 30 places of temporary storage of the waste, and what to do with that next? Well, nobody knows. So at a level of local self-government, at the level of communities, they don't understand this logistical chain of dealing with those waste. We are lacking information on the kind of specifications of this waste, on what is considered as dangerous waste, what can be used, what is subject for recycling. Now, this is the knowledge that local people need. And this gap is resolved by means of creating some teams by the local self-government authorities, but there are not enough of them. And what we can see, like in the Kiev region, the active businesses involved in that. But based on the expertise, this is not enough. We were thankful to the Ministry of the Recovery and who help us with the Japanese project on the destruction waste management. But since we don't know the origin of this damage, we don't know whether we will be able to use those materials, and somehow we cannot provide this information for the ministry, for the register or for the classifier. We don't know what's going to be the result, the outcome of this recycling. So this is a big challenge at the local level. We don't have people, we don't have knowledge in order to do that. So that's a key challenge that the regional authorities face while implementing the waste management reform at the local level. That's talking about the destruction damage. The solid household waste, this is something that we're trying to solve in Ukraine since the moment of, since 1991. We try to say, okay, this is the packaging, this is the electronics, to find this unique approach. But Oleg has mentioned that we've been talking about this for 4 years, but I've heard about this law only in 2015. And the fact that it's not yet implemented, it means that our efforts are not enough. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm grateful to the ministerial team that despite the changes, despite the martial law, they proceed with this reform. They continue pushing this reform. They're combining the representatives of the society and the MPs and the ministry around it. So I would like to suggest and to ask for the support of the ministry and MPs that the knowledge that we today can get thanks to these presentations today has to be kind of closer to the community, closer to the business working in our community. So if there will be a possibility, then with the support of our partners, with the support of GIZ, UN, UNDP, and things like that, we need to get this knowledge to the people, to gather people or representatives of local authorities. We need to kind of explain how it all works on the basis of landfills. One of the successful cases, together with the JICA project, that we're planning to implement in the Kiev region, that is clearly the projects on managing solid household waste, and this goes with the support of the minister, and the Kiev region was the first region to sign a memorandum on implementation of this project. So we've identified 2 clusters for constructing the capacities in processing solid household waste. And this is kind of not the first approach to this challenge. What's good is that the leaders of communities have signed this memorandum, because it was always a problem how to enforce the continuous supply of solid household waste in the places of their transportation. That was the gray kind of network that we cannot establish. So now this memorandum is signed, and I know that we were not the only region. It's just that we were first region to sign this, and hopefully that together with others we'll be able to develop these 2 facilities. And what's also important, we can motivate the communities to supply solid household waste to those facilities, because that's the key challenge. And it's not that they don't want, they have their own business interests, but what we can see at the regional level, it's not always that they have their own business interests. In many cases, this is related to the gap of knowledge. They don't know how to arrange all that. So hopefully we'll be able to use this project as a platform for spreading the knowledge among the communities. Now, in order not to move in a chaotic manner, as we kind of had in 2022, it's important for us to have this task by the Ministry of Environment on the development of a regional plan for waste management. So this is the task that we'll be working on in 2024. It would be good to have some support of international partners, because we're lacking the human resources in order to have a kind of a proper effective document, not just a piece of paper. That's why we'll be asking the experts to kind of help us. We want to have a regional waste management kind of approach to become a source of information for other communities, so that the next step, we want to use this program, Environment of the Kiev region. We want to make sure that the other agencies will be developing their own plans for the management of waste. The key objective is clear identification of the landfills for waste, their connection, their logistics. So this is the information needed by international partners, by our business owners, because they cannot calculate the investment projects without such an information, and there's no source for that. So that's it from me, because when we will solve these questions, we can be, starting with the fulfillment of our own commitments within the Euro integration. We can try with implementation of the circular economy, and for that we would need to have some experience at local level. Hopefully we'll start with the Kiev region. Thank you. These are fairly strong messages, and surely as a result of this conference there has to be some, conclusions made that should be used as the basis for the next steps of this pretty complicated reform process. Now, what I've heard is the issue of the platform of specialized knowledge in the field of waste that, we face, and the whole world didn't have challenges like we have, and there's so many other questions that we haven't considered yet, but we need to make sure we cope with that. And as I was preparing for today's conference, I got a phone calls from business owners, from investors, that they want to invest in waste management, but they want to know more about capabilities, technologies, analysis, researches. And I think by combining everyone in this room, in this stage, that's all the branches of power, the two ministries, will be able to develop a platform as a source of information and experience sharing. And surely that's a pilot project on improving the waste management system, which is also very important. We have Taras Kaluzhny with us, the director of the state enterprise Zelena Misto, which is a green city. That's the city of Lviv. So that's the public utility company which is managing the landfill that sustained a large tragedy and that we've seen today on this promo video. Just to remind you that the Supreme Court has considered that Lviv administration as being found guilty of inactions. So Taras will tell us about the reform which is taking place at the local level. You've heard some of the challenges for the region. Well, city of Lviv, it's a big city with more than 1 million of population. So how do you implement the project? On the reconstruction of this landfill, how are you planning to resolve the waste management issue in the city of Lviv in future? Taras, you have the floor. Dear colleagues, hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. Thank you for the invitation. I apologize. I couldn't reach Kiev because of technical reasons, but we have a chance to talk online. My name is Taras Kaluzhny. I'm the head of the public enterprise Green City, and we also implement a number of green projects in Lviv related to the recovery of the landfill as well as the construction of the waste management factory. We were first to start the first waste treatment station in Lviv. We've gathered the money, and we have some organic waste that I'll be mentioning later on. And on the overall, let me remind the things where we've started, what's the position is now, and some of our perspectives. So let me start the presentation now. Hopefully you can see my presentation. Yes? Good. So Green City is the public utility company that was established in 2017. As you know, in 2016 we had a large tragedy. We had a serious situation with the landfill, resulting in 4 people being killed. And this tragedy resulted in involving a number of funds for the implementation of projects. And this is a range of the first projects that we are implementing. So let's start with the recovery of the landfill. Back in 2020, we've concluded an agreement with the Turkish company on the first stage of the recultivation recovery. That's the technical phase. As you know, the recultivation recovery is divided into several stages. The technical recultivation is a very important stage, which allows to kind of reform the main body of the landfill. This is something that we have over 70 years. We've made sure we complied with our legislation. We've did the release of gases from the landfills, and also, in the end, We use some of the materials that prevent the external factors to kind of impact the landfill. We completed 90% of the works. In spring, should everything be fine, we'll start the biological stage, meaning we'll cover our landfill with shrubs, with grass, and we're planning to use this landfill as a recreational area. And let me remind you that the city of Lviv in 2017, we have received from the EBRD and from some of the donors, we've received some loans and grant money for the implementation of this project, so that you would understand the recultivation of the landfill. It requires around 18 to 90 million euros, so the project is very difficult. The depth of the landfill in 2020 was 114 meters. Today, after certain work, this landfill is closed and it's covered with 3 materials, and it's shrinked by 45 meters now. So should everything be fine, by the end of this year, we'll finalize the biological phase, and then we'll have post-monitoring. That's the last photo before the tragedy of the landfill. I believe many of you heard about this. You've seen this tragedy. So that's the photo as of April. Then this is 100,000 tons of waste in just as the result of earthquake. It moved by 400 to 500 meters, and 3 employees of the State Emergency Service and 1 environmental worker were killed. Unfortunately, we have not identified all the bodies. We have found only bodies. So this is 2020. So should you compare with the previous photo, this is not like landfill already. The geometry is cleared, and we're doing some works. So that's the recovery cultivation. That's what you can see. Those lakes will filtrate, and we use osmosis for doing some clearing. And in the end, we have some technical water that we are using. And then this is the geotextile, which is the material for the proper finalization of the technical recultivation of the landfill. That's the photo as we have it now. So it's important also to clear the filtrate. That is the kind of fluid that was generated by the landfill, and it can have an impact on forests and roads and everything. We have 2 filtrate clearing stations to cover that. We used also the loan money. We bought 2 modules for filtrate clearance station, and it allows to process 150 cubic meters of filtrate per day. So this is the filtrate before cleaning and after cleaning. The technology is pretty solid, and it clears the filtrate pretty good. In the end, the result complies with all the norms mentioned in the document. The other project is doing with some food waste.
We launched a pilot composting project, placing separate 120-liter containers across sites so that Lviv residents could separate food waste, other household waste, for us to focus on composting. This is the system in a nutshell. Quite a simple solution. The number of containers covers more than 99% of all the houses, and there is a pre-agreement with the transportation company to collect this food waste at specified intervals, bringing it to the municipal composting station, which brings us compost. that we send to individual residents, bigger agrarian producers, and we have a steady demand for it. This is for your understanding in figures. The number of collections and the volume of collections from the beginning of it. And you can see a growing trend that continued into 2023. Yeah. One problem that we have to face is plastic bags used by some to dump the food waste. We are working on it with local community members to reduce the number of plastic bags used for it. This is how the composting site looks like. You can see the equipment on the background and the mounds to compost our organic waste. Another project is building a mechanical biological treatment facility. We use a loan facility from the BRD for that. The city has 600 tons of waste produced a day. The technology we opted for is called biodesiccation technology that allows receiving RDF-type fuel. We signed a contract with a cement plant in Ivano-Frankivsk for them to buy this RDF fuel for their own consumption. That way they will be able to replace gas and coal used for that. According to our estimates, we are going to get about almost 70,000 tons of RDF-type fuel a year. As of today, we have completed up to 62% of total construction work under the project. We are reaching a quarter of the project. Some corrections had to be made because of the war, but we still make a solid progress. And the total cost of such a facility is about 52 million euro, quite a sizable amount. For some communities, it may be unsustainable. And from here, the need to have synergies with the central government for that. These are the photos from the very beginning of the site, when the land was broken. We had to use supporting columns because of the specifics of the territory. Currently, we have works being done to cover the processing facility with roofs. When complete, it will include both mechanical and bioprocessing equipment, like separation drums, sifting equipment, and so on. And we are going to have like biokilns to stabilize the bio waste. The full cycle will take about 70 days, involving the rendering the material safe from any harmful pathogens. A couple of more photos, the actual ones. Just separately about our another enterprise, Bodna Rivka, that is working together with us to spread and promote the news about proper handling of waste, separation of waste, and so on. So the figures are on screen. I'm not going to reread them, but it says it's good news. in terms of greater, ever-increasing number of Lviv residents and guests to the city being increasingly responsible about ways of sorting waste. We have a separate company, an enterprise set up exactly to cater for our needs with relevant equipment to process batteries, lighting lamps and fixtures, and other such. We have set up several collection points for that. We also intend to start transborder shipments of such materials to Poland for the safe processing. Thank you for your time. Ready to take your questions. Thank you, Taras. Please stay with us. We are through with the speeches at our panel. The panel itself continues, though. And I think this is a nice example of circular economy at the level of a local community. I'd like to wish you implementing all your ideas. It's really nice to see that you went on with finishing your landfill sites even in the time of war. And I would like to give a big round of applause to the event coordination team for their ability to set up this very nice and rich program in spite of the time, in spite of the circumstances. The selection of speakers is just enthralling. All branches of government represented, all the key stakeholders here. Thank you, and I think we can launch our discussion. Please raise your hand because we still have 10, maybe 15 minutes to go. I thank speakers for being exactly on time, which gives us this precious Q&A time. Please, Lyudmila Tsiganok. Generally, I'd like to see how many hands do we have, to see how many questions we may take, to understand the amount of time, the time slot to be distributed. Okay, we have just a couple of hands, then we will have enough time to discuss both questions. So, Lyudmila, please, the time is yours. Just tell us who you'd like to ask the question. Good afternoon, dear panelists and forum participants. I'm the president of the Association of Environment Professionals, and I represent the community of those who are in charge of all the environmental reforms. So I have a quite wide-ranging question. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone, and Taras particularly, for tackling the waste management problem. This reform has long been overdue, and thanks for you primarily to start doing something about it. Second part of my comment, we are at the time of war. Please be mindful of that. You do know that if there is a heart arrest, every doctor knows that it's time for ER. Similarly, when it comes to waste management, there are some situations when emergency and resuscitation measures are necessary without wasting no more time. It would be logical, I think, to put the question to Evgenia Popovich from the Ministry for Environment Protection. What are some real mechanisms of waste management have been included by the ministry in the bill? The presentation was nice, and the framework legislation is definitely not enough. Meanwhile, I represent those economic agents who produce waste, also hazardous waste. So my question is about the waste that the enemy is increasingly targeting. We have seen many the attempts cut short, thankfully, by our security service to inflict that type of damage to the Ukrainians. So what are the real mechanisms of setting up this reform to see it go and ticking? Because reforms on the paper is one thing, but there are real reform requirements. So what are the mechanisms that you have included as suggested by the companies that produce waste and hazardous waste included?
Законодавчим регулюванням взаємодії у сфері небезпечних відходів, куди подіти ці небезпечні відходи.
So we see hazardous waste being a growing problem because of the legislative problems. The producers of them are now stuck from early January.
Яке дозволить запустити реальні реформи, а не лише говорити про стратегії.
I'd like to know how the reform can go realistically, how changes and amendments to the law on environment protection can be pushed through, how environmental inspection can be reinvigorated, how to ensure that all the professionals involved are properly trained, how environmental officers can be made official at production sites. My question is also, is there a political will to break through with the matter? Okay, that's a lot of questions, and Evgenia will start with you. Okay, mechanisms, waste management mechanisms, collection, processing, and so on. As regards mechanisms, waste management mechanisms, we designed legal regulation to cover the operation of waste-producing equipment, and it says everything about things to be done by the company producing waste. And there are specific regulations on composting. Ministry for Public Health Protection has to design regulation on medical and hospital waste. Regarding your message about hazardous waste producers going unlicensed since 9th of January this year because of legal problem, I can tell you the law on environmental protection expressly provides for collection and accumulation of such hazardous waste without any license requirements, which also involves their transfer by the producing entities. The reform itself has started already. First documents have been already submitted. And some inspections of the propriety of licenses issued to producers have started. 17 positive conclusions were made already. We've got 54 sets of documents for permits, and there is an ongoing online communication with submitting entities to explain them how they can receive their documents electronically, so the reform is already humming. Thank you. Oleg? I'm sorry, but my question concerned real mechanisms of waste treatment and civilized treatment. So the ministry is not just about licenses and permits. If it's about real environmental reform, everyone in the public has to understand, including economic operators, what are the mechanisms that the central body of the executive has envisaged to use to stimulate the real sector of economy to go with reform. Because the measures you mentioned, they simply will not allow having this reform. It's very simple. If the Transcarpathian Oblast has no license, they will have to bring it to another territory license to process such type of waste, which is 600 kilometers from them. I don't think any environmental protection officer will be able to convince them to incur such losses. Dear Ludmila, you know, when I'm listening to your example of some Transcarpathian example with guys not willing to bring the waste elsewhere, let us understand there is waste produced by a manufacturer. It may be a hazardous waste. There is a principle, the polluter pays. So let us be clear, waste, hazardous or not, is something that costs. If we have a look of what had existed before the law was adopted, we will understand that local self-government would, on an annual basis,
наприклад, в Закарпатській або десь в Тернопільській області, отримував дотацію від органу місцевого самоврядування за передачу таких відходів, які він зібрав на своїй території до того чи іншого ліцензіатора.
Waste, also hazardous waste. Again, the state will have to pay some little extra. Well, it had to pay to those who would produce waste. Now the law says it's about changing the whole hierarchy. So if you are to produce this waste, you have to be clear from the outset as to what is the course of action. This is economic agent's personal independent opinion. Either he's going to get busy and process it itself, or he's going to address another company, a licensed waste operator. Moreover, there are such notions at BREF and best available technologies under the directive that we have to implement, and this is the new foundation for everyone's operation. Okay, Oleg, and a couple of words from you. Yes, let me continue in respect of the question of real mechanisms from Ludmila. It's about attracting investments. When the state, together with local communities, will be charged with instituting a real working economic model in this case, with clear understanding of where the waste is to be processed, why it cannot be buried in landfills anymore, and what kind of economic model has to be implemented, and what potential economic benefits of having them processed might be achievable. Taras actually reported about waste management plans and how these will be used across this infrastructure of treatment processes. I think Taras, with his Lviv experience, could confirm, because they suggested some similar model in Lviv when trying to talk to potential investors, and investors finally approved it. It's a matter of approach towards solid waste, methods of treating them. Yes, for some communities it can be a challenge. They might need to join their efforts with other communities to do that. But, well, there are memorandums signed for that purpose. There are some regional plans for solid waste treatment. The precondition for that should be, on the one hand, high rates of solid waste landfill burial tax to make it not feasible. On the other hand, there should be a carrot in terms of a mechanism of responsibility for non-compliance with available legislation. This is how it should go. It should be about also responsibility of communities themselves, the ability to attract investments, their understanding that the thing can no longer be put under the cover for some years. And facilities like they already have in Lviv, it might take 4, maybe 5 years to build them. So there should be an understanding that if you want to resolve the problem in a number of years, you have to start right away. This is part one to chip in into Evgenia's answer. Now, second thing, you mentioned those services, inspectorates in companies, in-house ones. If you were able to visit the first part of our plenary session when we spoke about the state environmental control office, you probably would hear that we cannot reform completely the control system by just reforming a bit of administrative part of it, because actually it can be rebuilt and refigured, reconsidered by anyone in any company. It's already increasingly an administrative responsibility of every company.
Well, maybe you can motivate every single business, but that's in the frames of the single system environmental control in our country. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we've offered some impetus for that in this regulation 6304D, in providing constitutional rights of the citizens for a safe environment. We've already introduced for a mechanism of the establishment of such services. Hopefully it will be adopted, so please work. So thank you. Thank you, and Lyudmila, thank you for many questions. I mean, the topic of waste could be raised on many dimensions. Just wanted to say, on the 9th of February, the Civil Council of the Ministry of Environment will have a session on waste. So everyone, please be prepared. We have invited the Ministry of Environment, we've invited the committee, we've invited the Ministry of Infrastructure, we've sent all the invitations. Everyone will participate, and there will be a Q&A session. Because today we had just a general presentation. It kind of was all logical, so we continue. There's really many more questions, but I'm not going to spend the moderator's time for that. So, okay, you have your own question? Alina Sebastianova, the PhD of the Department of Green Economy at the State University. I have a question to Natalia Viktorovna. Question on this Build Back Better. Will you kind of enshrine this principle on the legislative level? Are you planning to have any legislative tools to have this method? And what's the cooperation with other ministries on that? Thank you for the question. Well, talking about this principle of Build Back Better, we are focusing on 3 aspects. First, it's the matter of accessibility. We understand that the number of people who would need special approach would unfortunately increase, but we have to be ready for that. And at the initiative of the First Lady of Ukraine, even before the war, there was this Council of Barrierlessness was established, and it helped us to create the legislative grounds for changing the approaches to accessibility in Ukraine, to change the philosophy. Well, at least we're trying to use the architects who would be applying the best practices that we have for this basis. Because our task for the Ministry of Infrastructure is not only about, implementing at the level of certain legislation the approaches that I've mentioned. It's not about accessibility only, but to offer what Lesia has mentioned, this understanding what it is and how this should be implemented. So this training, it's very important. The second principle that we apply, that's the civil protection aspect. This is also another common thing that we have for central executive authorities. So last year, we've changed the state construction norms, and there will be new approaches. Just to remind you, earlier in Ukraine, the structure of the civil defense facilities was based on the fact that these facilities should be enough to cover 10% of the population of the settlement. But considering the situation that we have, and based on what the president has said, that every person in the country should either be helping on the front line or should be helping by investing his own efforts into the economical component, then we would need to have such a structure of shelters that would be that would allow the people to be economically effective. And the third component, that's a component related to energy effectiveness. So all of that is related to not only what we would need to implement. I mean, we tend to use this words like best European practices on energy effectiveness, but we have to explain that's all related to the amount of money you'll be paying by utility bills. So we would need to. This is a far more complicated issue, and this is only the main aspects that I've mentioned. Now, only these three are the prioritized for us in terms of legislation. But speaking of plans, this is not the plans. Most of it have been implemented already, and this is related to the fact that we will need to teach the architects, the designers, and the organizations dealing with inspections. We need to explain them what this is and what it results. Thank you, Natalia. I thank to all the speakers, and this is the end of the panel. We'll have 10 minutes break. Thank you.
Дивіться, можливо, в спікерів 10 хвилин перерви, але ми продовжуємо, тому що ми вибиваємося з таймінгу.
Maybe the speakers would have 10 to 15 minutes break, but not for the audience, because we are out of time already. I know that you won't be stopped at this point, maybe, but please stay on your seats, because in a couple of minutes we'll start with our new panel, well, the next panel, and there's different types of ways, and we can see how different regions are coping with that, but the next topic would be related to what we are breathing with. It's what the industry is doing. We're talking about the decarbonization of the production industry. We'll have a lot of participants, 5 speakers. We'll start in just a minute, but it's important to say that our discussion continues even outside of the event. Just right after this panel, after the final words, you'll be able to discuss this all actively, because our today's event is not just to discuss some topics, but to set the directions and to give new sense for the discussions. So hopefully there will be more opportunities for sharing the ideas and discussing the questions that some of you might have as you are listening to your speakers. And our next panelists are about to be ready. We'll have Irina Sopron as the moderator of the next panel. We'll have 60 minutes for this panel. But since we are already late by 25-30 minutes, we'll be asking our panelists to be more concise in their answers.
Я ж нагадаю, що триває і
I would like to remind you that the United for Nature Agenda for Ukraine Forum is about to finish. This is already the second forum. The first forum took place last October together with the Prosecutor General's Office. This is an important platform for getting united and holding Russia accountable and restoring fair peace. Today, we had representatives of diplomatic circle, ministries of environment of Romania, Moldova, and Bulgaria, with whom we have long-lasting neighborly relations, joint borders, and some interest in the Black Sea. We had some leading experts, representatives of NGOs and public officials, and we continued discussion of the most topical challenges of the green transformation of Ukraine and the climate policy of reforming the water industry, environmental control, as well as the initiatives and the international projects that are about to be implemented or launched in 2024. We've also heard the report of the Ministry of Environment for 2023 and their plans for 2024. And we've also heard the valid indicators of damages to environment caused by the Russians. That was mentioned by the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal. We've had the plans for the development of the park called Mezhyhirya. And we had some more information on the plans for 2023-2024 by the Ministry of Environment, because as they are hosting today's event. I can see already the first participants, the first panelists joining in. I believe Roman is already with us. He's the head of the State Service for Geology and Soil of Ukraine. Others will be joining in very soon, and we'll continue in just a minute. In a moment.